Okay, so I wanted to welcome Abby Buter. As I mentioned before, she used to work with Day 7, is spent many years in Nashville, although she grew up in Detroit and now lives in Tacoma, Washington. She is an Enneagram and self-care coach, really expert in the Enneagram. She also has spent a lot of years working for different nonprofits, also works for a nonprofit in Tacoma, Washington now doing development. So wears lots of hats, has lots of areas of expertise, but has done a lot of research and work with nonprofit and faith-based organizations, learning about self-care and creating healthy cultures and taking care of staff teams. So we're really grateful to have you with us today, Abby, teaching on the Enneagram. And thank you.
Thanks, Candace. So good to be here with you all. Can you hear me okay and see my screen? Just want to double check that before we get started. Is that good? Okay, good. Like Candace said, I am Abby. I live out in Tacoma, Washington, but used to live in Nashville for many, many years. I miss Nashville a lot. Not exactly this week because out here it's like 65, 70 degrees, and I definitely am not made for summer. So the weather out here suits me way better than Nashville weather. But if you're in Nashville, it's always close to my heart. And I love Day 7. So just really excited to be here to talk to you about the Enneagram and what the Enneagram is. And so we're going to do it really quick today. Usually this kind of presentation, I try to take like 2 hours or so. So we're going to just know that as kind of a disclaimer before we get started, that it is a very condensed version. So we're not going to hit a ton of things, but enough to kind of whet your appetite to learn more, hopefully, and give a better understanding of what it is. But before we get started, I really like to do a quick, just little grounding exercise and some breathing. So we won't stay here long, but I just want to get started with this. So if I invite you, if you're comfortable with closing your eyes, if you're not comfortable closing your eyes, that's okay. If you can just soften your gaze, you're welcome to turn your camera off if you want, but everyone's eyes will probably be closed, so they won't see you anyways. As you close your eyes or soften your gaze, put both feet on the floor if that's possible to you. This grounds us into the earth and helps us stay present where we are. And as you move your feet and stay grounded, breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And take those deep belly breaths. We don't want to see our shoulders coming up. We want to see our belly expand. Sometimes it might help to put a hand on your belly or on your chest and just take a few deep breaths there. I'm sure it took a lot for you to be here this morning with getting kids to school, getting things off your to-do list, checking that email, whatever it took to get here. Bring your attention to that. And then set it down next to you and keep breathing. It will be here when we're finished. And loosen your shoulders down from your ears. Relax those muscles in your face. And take 3 more deep breaths. Then bring your attention back to the computer when you're ready. Great. Thank you. That helps me get grounded too and just stay present in our space together. And before we dive in, I wanted to do a couple polls that Candace is going to put on the screen just to kind of gauge where everyone is with the Enneagram is helpful to me, and just where we can see where everyone is. Candace, I don't remember which one's first. Maybe if you're familiar with the Enneagram. So if you guys can just take a second to indicate your response of how familiar you are with the Enneagram. That should pop up on your screen here in a second. Are you really familiar? Like, I could teach this course. Are you like, what is the Enneagram? I've never heard it before. So indicate on there what that answer is for you.
Can you see the poll results, y'all?
I can't.
Maybe because you're sharing.
Will you tell me what they are? Great.
It's one person said very familiar and 5 people said somewhat familiar.
Perfect. Great. And then the next one poll is going to be just if you know your Enneagram type, indicate that. If you're not sure, there's a not sure option as well. So that's also just of interest to see who we've got in the space. Candace, whenever they're ready, do you mind?
We've got 2 1s, 1 4, 1 8, and 1 unsure.
Great. All right. Awesome. Thank you all for answering that for us. That just helps kind of hear who's in the room, but I know you also know and work with lots of other people at Enneagram types, which is one of the great things about the Enneagram. It not only allows us to have more compassion for ourselves and understanding for ourselves, but also for other people. So I just encourage you, of course, to pay attention to your type when we're talking about that, but also to, if you know you have a partner or a coworker or a boss, sometimes it can help to learn a little bit more about that type as well as we interact with people of all different types every day. Also, I am very okay with answering questions. We don't have a ton of time. So if we can try to save them to the end, but if one comes up as we're talking, you're welcome to put that in the chat. Also, as we go through your type, if you want to put in the chat, if I'm talking about ones and you're a 1 and you think like, oh my goodness, that really resonated, or let me share a little tidbit about being a 1, please do that. I may not see it as I'm going through the information, but everyone else hopefully will. And that's one of the best ways that we can learn the Enneagram is through each other. I can speak very well from my own perspective of my type structure, and I can teach about each of all of the others, but it's great to be able to hear from people's personal experience as well. So please enter anything in the chat if that is of your type, or if you have a little story about it, that is totally fine. And then I will ask for questions at the end, just in case I don't see them during. But if there is one that comes up and Candace, you see it, feel free to interrupt. That's totally fine. So what is the Enneagram? We're going to talk for a second about what it is. And again, this will be brief and not really go full into the full depth of it. And then we're going to go through each of the 9 types. And again, there'll be kind of the highlights of each type, but then we'll get through it all today and let you out on time. So here we go. So what is the Enneagram? The Enneagram is a personality typing structure, but also a wisdom tradition. It has a rich, deep history that goes back many, many years. And it's not always been this diagram that you see in front of you. It's evolved just like most things do. But it really, what it does is it really identifies our motivations and why we do what we do. So it's different from other personality typing tools like maybe Myers-Briggs or some of the other things that focus more on our behavior, whereas the Enneagram really is about our motivations. And so for me as an Enneagram coach, I'll have clients come to me and just say like, just tell me what I am. I just like, that's why I wanted you to just tell me. And so I can't tell people what they are. I can ask good questions and we can, and I can give Enneagram information, but no one can tell you what type you are because no one's inside your head, because it's all about our motivation. It's all about why we do what we do. And with the Enneagram, it shows we have 9 unique lenses through which we view the world. So it's not saying one is better than other. A type 1 is not better than a type 9. The numbers are just kind of labels. They don't have any hierarchy or anything like that. It's just saying not everyone views the world in the same way, and there tends to be 9 unique ways in which we do. And it helps us see kind of our internal operating system. And so if I'm an 8, I'm going to respond to one situation this way. If I'm a 3, I'm going to respond to it this way. And why is that? So the Enneagram helps give us that wisdom and information to help us move through the world, because we tend to operate mostly from our ego and our personality. So when we are young, usually they say our Enneagram types are pretty solid by the time we're 5, but as we're young and growing, we develop a personality. So our personality, Suzanne Stabile says, our personality is the clothes that we wear to weather the world. So it's how we learn to interact with people, how to get our needs met, how to communicate, how to interact with our caregivers. So that personality builds up over time to help us navigate the world, how to deal with conflict, defense mechanism, all of that is built into our personality. And what the Enneagram says is you needed your personality and you needed your ego to keep you safe, but then we start to over identify with it and depend on it in a way that doesn't necessarily help us live from our most true, authentic self. And so we get stuck, we repeat patterns and behaviors. And so the Enneagram is this dynamic system that really shows how we can break free from our ego and our personality. It shows us how it gives us lots of good information about how we can behave in times of stress and in health. So we can say, oh, I don't have to live this way anymore. I can break free from my personality type, from my ego, and really live from my truest self. One of my favorite Enneagram analogies that comes from Beatrice Chestnut is she talks about how if we're all little acorns walking around the earth, and we might be able to have a really shiny acorn outside and be the best acorn, but then an older acorn comes along and points to an oak tree and says, did you know that that's what you're meant to be? Like that you're not meant to stay an acorn, you're meant to be this oak tree. And so this idea of the Enneagram helps us develop into oak trees. It helps us shed our acorn selves, the part of us that we think we always have to be this way, and to realize that we don't, that there's a true, most authentic self of ours that we're able to, if we commit to doing some good self-awareness, personal growth work, that we can really bring awareness to those patterns and behaviors to live not from our ego, but from our truest self. And you'll see here, this is the diagram here. That is what the Enneagram looks like if you're not familiar with it. Some people get freaked out by it, but it's really just Enneagram. In Greek, Ennea means 9, gram means diagram. So it's basically a 9-pointed diagram. All these lines mean something that we will get into in a second. But just that's, if you're not familiar with the system, that's what that looks like. And then how does Enneagram work? I like to briefly cover this just because there's a lot. The Enneagram has grown in popularity a lot, which is great, and also can mean, of course, like anything, that it gets very misused. It's kind of in some ways turned into a party trick, and you have people saying like, I'm a 9 sometimes and I'm a 4 sometimes, and just that's not exactly how it works. And so you have one main type your whole life, and it can change based on what your type cannot change, but your behaviors and what you look like, how you, if you're in a time of stress, can change based on these lines. So each type interacts with 4 other numbers, which is important to understand. Also, if you know your type, to kind of listen up to those other numbers when we're talking. So we'll use 9 here as an example. 9 in times of stress moves down here to 6. And so that means for a 9, they don't turn into a 6. They just take on the energies and behaviors of a 6. So a 9 who's usually very go with the flow and laid back in times of stress can get really anxious and take on a lot of those qualities of a 6. And then in health, or what's sometimes called the path of integration, 9s move to 3, where they don't become a 3, but they take on the energies and behaviors of a 3. So 9s who can struggle with believing their presence matters, that they don't have a voice, move to that 3 space and realize, okay, I can take up space. How do I use my voice? I can be more assertive. So they're able to take on those attributes. So when we understand the numbers we go to in stress and in health, and with 9s moving to 6s or whatever, 8s move to 5 in stress, and 2s in health. So you can kind of see all those connections there. where the number we tend to slide down into in stress gives us some good information for some red flags. So if you start seeing some of those behaviors or tendencies come up, it can give you like rumble strips on the interstate, like what, oh, I need to pay attention. What's going on, and realize what's same with path of integration and health, you're able to see, oh, I'm capable of taking on these behaviors and these energies as well. And then another numbers we interact with are our wings. So those are the numbers on either side of our main type. So again, 9 for 9, it's 8 and 1. For 3, it's 2 and 4. For 6, it's 5 and 7. So those numbers on either side. Again, you don't turn into those numbers. You just take on some of those tendencies and energies. If you think about it, like if your main type is plain scrambled eggs, you can get some salt from one wing, or you can get some pepper from the other wing, or you could get nothing from either. So people use their wings and access that energy in different ways. Some people have a lot, they can very clearly say, I am a 1 with a very strong 2 wing, or I don't feel like I have much of my wings on either side of me that I access much at all. And so there's no right or wrong way to be, which explains more too, all of these ways that we interact with all the different types on the Enneagram help us understand why each type can look different based on who you are. So if you're a 2 and you're like, I don't want to be a 2 because my mom's a 2, or I have a friend who's a 4 and I'm not like them at all, which is something I hear a lot, it's because there's all these different ways that inform our main type and our ego structure. And so that's what these numbers are telling us. And so you can think about like each type as a color. So if you walk into Home Depot and say, I want to paint my room blue, they're going to show you probably like thousands. I probably have thousands of blue colors. And so if 9s are blue, there's all different shades of blue. You can be a 9 who's really done a lot of good work and personal growth work and is operating from a more healthy space. You could be a 9 who has not done a lot of their work and is kind of living in that stress space. You can be a 9 with an 8 wing, looks different than a 9 with a 1 wing. So there's lots of things that color our different type. And that last thing you see there is the levels of development. There's 9 levels that we tend to live within our type that range from unhealthy to average to healthy. You can kind of think about it like if you put like a spoke at mid average and then down to unhealthy, you can fluctuate between those. And as maybe you're having a really good day and you can move up a little bit. So we tend to move up and down our levels of development every day. It's not like none of this work, is about arriving. We tend to think like, oh, I'll just learn more about the Enneagram or do all this, I went to therapy for a year, so I've arrived. Like, here I am, I'm healthy, but that's not how it works. And so that's more information. We won't get into that today because it's a lot more, but that's something else. If you dive more into the Enneagram, you can understand what your type structure looks like from that unhealthy, average, and healthy range. So again, it gives good information when you're thinking like, oh, today for 2s, I've been very, I haven't said no to a lot of things, like, oh, that's, red flag to indicate that maybe I need to check in with myself because I've not been having great boundaries. And that's what it looks like when I'm kind of operating on autopilot or from that unhealthy space. And so that information is given to us as well through Enneagram wisdom. Do you guys have any questions? I'll stop there just real quick about what it is. I know that was a quick overview, so just wanted to check in before moving forward. No. All right. So I have a few golden rules of the Enneagram that I like to say before we go any further, just because unfortunately the Enneagram can be misused and it's not helpful for people to misuse it, and it can be actually really harmful. I know a lot of people who don't want anything to do with it because of how it's harmed them, and that's completely understandable. So just want to make sure we can use it well and in a way that's not harmful of people. So a few of the golden rules, one is to never type others, like I said, and again, this goes with kind of point 2, it's all about motivation, is we can't tell people what's going on in their brain. And then one thing with the Enneagram is a lot of some of the different types of the Enneagram, their behavior can look very similar. So you might be like, oh my goodness, you're such a 3, but really that person, first of all, it's putting a label on them that they did not consent to or ask for, but also like, you don't know what's going on in their head. They may have some behaviors of a 3, but really their motivations are more 1 or they're more 8-like. So we're not going to type others. If you have people close in your life, close friends or partner or family members, you may be able to hear, these descriptions and think, oh my gosh, this person is such a 4, but you want to make sure you have their permission to give them insight. And we don't want to just go around typing people, because that can be harmful. And then also, like I said, it's all about motivation. This is also something helpful if you don't know your Enneagram type, to really pay attention to your why, as we're going through all 9 types of why do I do like what I do. If you're talking to someone who's new to the Enneagram and they can't land on their type, it's always going back to the why. So maybe I am a rule follower, but why? Why am I a rule follower? Maybe I like to have fun and jump from activity to activity. Well, why? Because that can look different based on which type. And then don't use the Enneagram as a sword or a shield. So we don't want to, if you're working with someone and they get emotional at work and you say, oh my gosh, you're such a 4, stop being so emotional. So we don't want to use that as a sword. We don't want to use it as a way to label people's behavior and to cause harm in that way. But we also don't want to use it as a shield, like, sorry, I just can't do that. I'm a 6 and it makes me nervous, so I'm just not going to do it. So we don't want to use it as a shield either, or as an excuse to not do something. And lastly, that remembering that discomfort is not always bad, that there is things with Enneagram. One thing I really like about the tool, but can be hard, is it's not really just this fluffy tool. We won't get into a lot of the deeper stuff today, again, because of time, but it doesn't always make you feel good. It doesn't make you feel good to realize that, oh my goodness, I've been doing that from a place of needing to be needed, which makes me feel loved, which would be something a 2 would say. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize I've been kind of deceiving people because of this. So it gives you some discomfort. So I encourage you to pay attention to that discomfort today as you hear it, to allow it to turn to curiosity instead of judgment. So if you feel like squirming in your seat, or if you're thinking like, I don't know about that, to not judge yourself of why you're feeling that way, but say like, that's an interesting feeling. Why is that? What is that? What is that feeling telling me? And realizing that, we kind of exist in our comfort. There's kind of comfort, and then discomfort is right outside of that. And then right outside discomfort is maybe where we start to feel unsafe. We're not going to get to that level today, but just so draw attention to that, if you're going a little bit out of that discomfort stretch zone, take care of yourself and do what you need to do to kind of calm your nervous system down and step away if you need to do that. But I just want to make sure we get comfortable with discomfort, because it's not always bad. And then lastly, before we dive into each type, just remembering that with information comes transformation. I like to remind people of this, especially when we're learning about the Enneagram, because it's, one of those things, there is a lot of information. The Enneagram in some ways is kind of, I always say it's simple but complex. Like you're like, oh, there's 9 types and you're one of these types, but then there's a lot to it when you really get into it. And that you can learn all this information today and learn as you study, but then that doesn't mean transformation comes with that just because you know things. So I encourage you to dive deeper with that. Discomfort also often leads to transformation. And so really to be okay with moving forward just past learning the information. But that's what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to dive into each of the 9 types, kind of the rhythm that we're going to do this in, keeping an eye on the time. We're going to go quick. So to get through all 9. And you'll see some pictures on each slide. And those are just some pictures of things that embody that type. It might be, I say this as I said, don't type people. It might be a celebrity or well-known person who either has identified that type or a character, or they have some traits of a type. So you'll see some pictures on each slide, and we'll talk about the ego ideal. So how each type wants to be viewed in the world, strengths and fears. And then we'll talk about each type's weakness. Some teachers call that a passion. Some call it a sin. I call it a weakness. So we'll go through each type. So by the end of our time, you have a better understanding of each of the 9 types. So I start with 8 for a few reasons, but partly so the 7s pay attention, so they go last, but also we don't have time to get into triads today, but 8s are the first type in our body triad. So I like to start with them. And also each type has a title. So for 8s, that's the protective challenger. Some people like labels, others do not. So take them or leave them, whatever. It can help just for some people to hear more, to kind of label them in that way. But eights are the protective challenger. So eights always want to be seen as the powerful person. So they're a force, as you can see those waves. That person going, with strength, they're strong, they're a force. Some people will describe eights as wanting to be like a snowplow. You want to be behind them instead of in front of them. But eights are they're courageous people. You think of Martin Luther King Jr., who was able, a lot of people have said he was probably an eight. Eights are able to stand in front of a movement, and they're natural leaders. They're not afraid of standing up for the underdog. They don't like to be controlled. Their biggest desire is to protect themselves, and they really fear being weak or powerless, betrayed. I have a friend who, she's an eight, and when I asked what her biggest fear was, she said that some people tell me what to do and that I would be controlled. And so that is very real for an eight. If anyone's seen the new Little Women movie, there's a really great scene in there where two of the sisters, Jo is talking to her sister Beth, who is sick, and Jo kind of says, "You're going to get better. Father's going to get better. We're going to be fine." And Beth says, "If it's God's will, it's going to happen." And Jo says, "Well, that God's will hasn't met my will. What Jo wills will be done." And so that's a great thing an eight would say. Eights tend to feel like they can influence the world, and their will be done in the world. Their weakness is lust or excess. And so just this means that for them, they tend to really go after things with intensity. So if a feeling isn't intense, they don't really want to feel it, or they don't even see it. A lot of eights will say, if people don't meet them with their energy, that they don't really notice them, and that they don't tend to really pay as much attention to things that are not as intense, or kind of meet their energy for where it is. And so they have that weakness, is they're always kind of going after those feelings of intensity. But eights have an ability to energize others. They tend to be very confident. They show their anger very freely. People say that eights can tend to build intimacy through anger. So it doesn't scare them to be angry. It doesn't scare them to have conflict. But that is our eights. I think we had one eight. If you want to put anything in the chat, you're welcome to. Anything else about being an eight? Next, we have our nines, who are the peaceful mediators. You see there, I showed this to my friend who's a nine, and she's like, that just makes me feel good looking at the pictures. So nines, they really want to be seen as a peaceful person. They are accepting, easygoing. Nines are the number with the least amount of energy on the Enneagram, because they're very boundaried. So nines do everything they can to not rock the boat and to avoid conflict, because nines really desire connection. They want to be at peace. They want to connect, and conflict to them threatens that connection. And so they're always trying to keep peace externally. So they're very boundaried, of kind of saying, don't mess with my peace. Like, I'm going to keep everything out here at a certain distance so I don't get my peace messed up. And then they're even boundaried internally, if they've got to keep the peace inside and in their own mind. And so that's very exhausting. And so nines have a low amount of energy on the Enneagram, or the lowest out of all the types on the Enneagram. And their weakness is sloth, which really does not mean nines are not lazy. That's something some people think, and it's not true. The sloth means really more about an inability to fully engage in life, because when we fully engage in life, our boats are going to get rocked. Like, if you fully engage, you're going to deal with conflict. Things are going to be exhausting. And so nines have sometimes this numbness or this inability to fully engage in life, because they don't want their boats to be rocked. Nines also tend to what's called merging. So they tend to merge their opinions with anyone else's. And so if everyone wants to go for pizza for dinner, but they wanted burgers, they're going to end up saying like, "Oh yeah, pizza sounds great." And by the time they get to the pizza place, forget that they even wanted pizza in the first place, because they're always trying to keep the peace, and they'll kind of merge to do whatever everyone else was, so they don't rock the boat. But nines are very empathetic. They have an ability to see both sides. So when they're able to really recognize there's a difference between peacemaking and peacekeeping. So to be a peacemaker, we really have to step into conflict and not just keep the peace. They are really good at that when they're living kind of in their truest self, because they're able to see both sides. It can also look though like nines. I'm surrounded by lots of nines, a mom, two siblings, a best friend. So one of the things they do, because they're able to see both sides of things, you may be venting to them and saying, "Can you believe?" and da 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 da, and all, and they're like, they'll nod and say, and nod and be like, "Yeah." But then later on, you hear them saying something opposite of what you felt like they were agreeing to, and you're like, "I thought you were agreeing with me," and they will usually say, "I wasn't agreeing with you, but I can see where you're coming from." And so their ability to see both sides of thing is pretty astonishing. And they're really good at that, and which can make it hard for them to make decisions, because and nines often have a hard time landing on their type on the Enneagram, because as they hear each type, they're like, "Huh, that makes sense. Like, I could see myself in that. I could see myself in that." And so if someone's having a hard time, often I'll go to nine to see if that's what type they are. All right. Now we have our ones. With the ones, you'll see they're known as the moral perfectionist. A lot of ones don't like the term perfectionist. So another term that's often used with ones is the reformer. Ones have this ability to see what can make something better, and to what can be made to be improved. You see here with these pictures, even more straight lines and white space and the colors there, because ones always want to be seen as the good person. They want to be moral, responsible. I have had a client who said one of her greatest fears was honestly that she would one day realize she was just bad or just evil. And she's like, it sounds kind of extreme, but it's real. And so that's what ones fear. They don't want to be wrong, bad, or evil, because they really want to have integrity. They want to be good. Um, they have an ability to really walk into a room and see what needs to improve, which a lot of people can feel like comes out as criticism. So ones have an inner critic, and this is one of the best ways to know if you're one. If someone says, "Oh, you ones have an inner critic," most ones are like, "Yeah, doesn't everyone have that?" But ones have this really strong inner critic voice that is always criticizing themselves of how things could be better and the world around them and people, but it doesn't necessarily come out as strongly to other people. But it's such a strong voice in their own head of always saying, "This could be better. Why did you do it this way? We could make it better this way." And so people like eights can build intimacy through anger. Ones often will say they love through criticizing. So people may say to a one, "Why are you so critical?" And a one is thinking like, "You've only heard 10% of what goes on up here. What do you mean I'm being so critical?" So they have a really hard time and need to do a lot of work to have a relationship and compassion with that inner critic to help calm that voice a little bit. And for ones, their weakness is resentment, which really resentment looks like anger coming up, and then that's not appropriate or right. So they push it back down, and it just comes out in perpetual frustration with everything. So ones need to do a lot of work around feeling their anger and realizing it's okay to be angry. But ones have really high integrity. They make great judges on, I mean, as a career, I guess, but also just like if you were like, "Is this fair?" A one will be able to be objective and put that aside. They get stuff done. They're great people to have on your team. They're really responsible. They will follow the rules, though. They will not cut corners. When we get to threes, that's one big difference. Ones and threes can have a lot of similar behaviors, but if I ask someone, "Would you ever cut corners to get a task accomplished?" A one will be like, "No way." But a three would say, "Of course I would. Whatever's the most efficient." So that's a big difference between ones and threes. And next we have our twos. Twos are the supportive advisors. Twos really want to be seen as the loving person who's really thoughtful and generous. Twos' biggest fear is being worthless or being too needy. And so they struggle a lot with they don't want to have unworthiness of being loved. So what that looks like for twos is often becoming indispensable, and they have this need to be needed because they feel like if they're needed, that means they're loved. And so for them, that's a lot of the work that they need to do. Twos are the most relational number on the Enneagram. They're very oriented externally towards other people. They kind of have this tap on their shoulder every once in a while that's like, who can I think of? Like, I haven't thought of anyone else in a minute. Who can I think of? And so they're always kind of throwing out a fishing line to see like, who can I connect with? Who can I connect with? So they're very relational in that way. Because they really just want to be loved and wanted. So twos can struggle with boundaries. They are really good at feeling everyone else's feelings, but not their own feelings. And so when they start really growing, they move to four space, which helps them have good boundaries and get really in touch with their own feelings. And instead of just always being there for everybody else. And that's what that pride for them, for their weakness, what pride looks like for a two is this mindset that says like, I don't need help. I'm here for everybody else. Like I'm here meeting everyone else's needs. I don't need help. So if you have that person in your life who, you might know they're going through a hard time and you ask them what you can do. And they're like, I'm fine. I don't need anything. But like, how's your day? What's going on with you? So that may be something a two would say. And so twos need to kind of do the work to recognize that they do have needs and it's okay to have needs. Humans have needs. That is part of being human. So that's a good realization for twos to have. But twos are really giving and generous. They're very, if you need a encourager, cheerleader, they're your people. They're very supportive. It is the two superpower in a lot of ways. Each type has a superpower that can, like most things, strengths can be weaknesses. So ones, they really do know usually how to make things better and what needs to be done to be done well. So that's something that is their superpower. For twos really do tend to know what people need before they ask for it, or they really do to know how to anticipate people's needs and how to meet them. But knowing that that's not always helpful without people's consent or if they don't ask for help. So twos need to remember that. And like nines, their superpower is that cling and that ability to go with the flow, but not if it means at the sake of their own peace and their own being, and them not have them abandoning themselves just to keep the peace. So each type has its own superpower that they need to be aware of. Next, we have our threes. So threes are the successful achiever. Sometimes people call them the performer. So threes really want to be seen as the effective person, always professional and competent. They don't want to be seen as vulnerable or weak. They really desire to be valued and want to succeed. This doesn't have to mean succeeding in the traditional sense of like having a huge house and having the best cars, but whatever they're going to do, they're going to be good at it. So they're a mom, they're going to be the best mom. They're a friend, they're going to be the best friend, because their biggest fear is of failing or being incompetent. They, for some reason, when they were young, threes got the message from a caregiver or somehow that they're loved for what they do. And threes, again, kind of that superpower, threes tend to be good at whatever they do. So there's a reason we get stuck and we get our ego type reinforced over and over again. So threes tend to be good at what they do. And so they get this message like, oh, look at how much praise and admiration I'm getting because I'm so good at these things. And so for threes, it's unhooking from that ego to realize I'm just loved for just being. And what does that feel like to really know, like, if I fail at everything, I'm still loved. And that's really hard, can be really hard for threes to recognize. And threes are all about efficiency. So even though they're in what we call the feeling triad, they aren't big feelers always, because feelings aren't efficient. It's not efficient to get stuck in being sad or to feel grief, or so they keep moving past those feelings. They have a lot of energy. Eights have the most energy on the Enneagram. Threes are not far behind them, and neither are sevens. So eights, threes, and sevens have the most energy out of all the types. But for threes, that weakness of deceit doesn't mean they're out there lying to everyone, but really what it means is they deceive themselves into thinking they are what they project to everybody else. So threes have this superpower ability to walk into a space or into a room and project whatever they need to in order to be successful. So if they are in a room and they need to be the the shining leader that, knows, is competent and knows all the things, they're going to do that. If they need to be a savvy business person, even though they hate it, they're going to do it because that's what gets them accepted and success in that moment. And so that's where that deceit comes in, because they start believing they are what they're projecting to everyone else, instead of really asking who they are, and who are they truly, rather than just what they're projecting to others. And last, our 2s, 3s, and 4s are all in the feeling triad. So we have our last feeling triad type here. The 4s are the romantic individualist. They want to be seen as an original person who's creative and authentic. Sometimes 4s have a hard time with the Enneagram because they learn there's lots of other people like them, which is okay. Just if you're 4, it's okay that other people are like you. You're still your own original person. They don't want to be ordinary or boring. They have a hard time with everyday kind of tasks. Those just feel really boring to them. So it can be hard for them to not feel trapped in this mundane, like, why do I have to clean my room and do the dishes? Like, it's so boring. And so a 4 could struggle with that. And they really just have a desire to be themselves. They really just want to be themselves. They want to be authentic. There's a 4 who, like, when people come to their house, they don't want to clean like too much, because if it's too clean, it's just not really how they live. So it's like, even that comes out with their authenticity. And because they don't want to be inadequate, they want to have significance. That weakness of envy for 4s. 4s kind of come into the world feeling like everyone has it figured out and they don't. And so they kind of look around and feel like, why does everyone seem to figure it out? Why is it easy for everyone else? What am I missing? They feel like they have something missing. Their 4s often are very attuned to what's missing in a situation, rather than seeing what's already there. But 4s are very sensitive. 4s are also very in tune with their feelings. And so they'll often feel in one day what another type might feel in like 2 weeks. So they have lots of feelings. They tend to over-identify with their feelings. So they're not just sad, they like are sadness. And so that's one thing for 4s to remember, that they can unhook from those feelings. But they also are really okay with sadness and melancholy. So 4s, I know a lot of 4s who love like dreary, cold, rainy days. And 4s are also the best people to go to if you're going through a hard time. They're not going to try to fix you. It's really one of the best numbers on the Enneagram to go to if you have a type 4 friend. They're not going to try to fix you. They're okay sitting with you in grief and sadness. Their ability to empathize is really, really strong. They also see beauty in everything in the world. So they make the world more beautiful and help people be more attuned to that beauty. And next we have our 5s. 5s are the investigative thinkers. Sometimes people call them the observer. Like you can see in the picture, like through the camera lens, 5s tend to interact through the world one step back, kind of looking through a lens and on the outskirts of observing what's happening. 5s really want to be known as a wise person who's always knowledgeable. They don't want to be seen as emotional or transparent. They tend to have really high boundaries and are very private people. My best friend who's a 5, when we first became friends, she later told me this, like years later. She was like, we worked together and she's like, when you first, like, I got to know you, I was like, why does she ask me all these questions? Why is she asking me all these things? And I'm a 2. So I'm very like, I want to know you, just tell me all the things. And she's like, get away from me. And then she's like, and then I realized like you genuinely cared and wanted to know me. I was like, yeah, exactly. But for her as a 5 who is very careful with their energy, 5s are very careful with their energy and how they, because for 5s, if you think about 5s like a cell phone battery, they wake up with like an amount of energy for the day, and they have to manage that energy through the day, because every interaction, every conversation, every touch, every time someone asks their opinion, it drains that energy. So it's like a cell phone battery that just goes, and they don't get that energy back until the next day. So 9s have the least amount of energy on the Enneagram, but 5s also have a lower amount of energy and a managed amount of energy. So they get what they have when they wake up, and then that's what they get for the day. So they're always trying to manage that energy. And so if they see a day that has tons of meetings, they know that when they get home at night, they probably can't get together with a friend or something because they're just not going to have the energy. Fives really want to be competent. They don't want to be ignorant. The same friend, when I asked her before she knew anything about the Enneagram, what her biggest fear was, she said being made a fool. She's like, I'm afraid of being made a fool and not knowing something. So I was like, that's a very five-ish answer for you to say. Fives with avarice, their weakness. One of the things with fives is they have this fear that they're going to be completely depleted of their resources. So they tend to hoard, not necessarily physical things, but hoard their energy. They are afraid that they're going to be completely depleted of everything. So they don't want to be generous in what they give away to people, how they interact. That's why they stay really boundaried. And so for fives, one big growth for them is recognizing and kind of living into a state of abundance. What does it mean to believe that there's enough energy, enough for people? It's okay. You're not going to be depleted of everything if you're vulnerable with someone. But fives also are really objective and wise. They're very good at keeping secrets and keeping confidences. And so if you have a five, like on your work team, they're great people to ask for objective opinions, and also to really make sure you hear and listen to their takes, because they're not necessarily going to be people who always volunteer information, but if they're asked and are able to contribute, they pretty much always have something wise to say. And then our type sixes are known as the loyal guardian, the loyalists. Sixes want to be seen as the loyal person. They want to be seen as reliable and consistent. They are responsible people. Ones and sixes have some things in common when it comes to being consistent, being responsible. They don't want to be seen as difficult. Their biggest desire is to have security and to be safe, because they're really scared. Sixes, fear of itself, you see there, they're very scared of being alone, to not being safe, that weak. And then that comes out in their weakness of anxiety. So sixes are always kind of scanning of like, what's the worst that could happen? When's the other shoe going to drop? Because they're always going after that safety and security. And sixes where ones have that inner critic, sixes have an inner committee. They kind of have all these different voices in their head, pushing and pulling them from different things of, so you might think like a six may walk into a room and they're always kind of looking at who's the authority, who's safe, who can we trust in this space? And they're thinking, okay, that person's in charge, that's the authority. But then they have another little voice on their committee that's like, but we don't know them. How do we know we can trust them? And so these voices kind of pull them back and forth. And you see that picture of the people who are rock climbing right there. So six, for the Enneagram, there's actually two types of sixes, counterphobic and phobic sixes. So counterphobic sixes are sixes that have that fear inside of them, but the way that they deal with it is they run towards it. So they're probably the one climbing the rocks right there. So they're saying, this is scary to me, I'm going to move towards it. So counterphobic sixes can often look like eights, because they tend to move through the world more aggressively. They move towards things that scare them. And that's where, again, it's really important to go back to our why, to our motivations, because a six jumping out of an airplane their motivation looks very different than an eight jumping out of an airplane. And so looking at those motivations, whereas a phobic six, they are sixes that they deal with their fear and anxiety by not moving towards it. So they are more reserved. They're more risk adverse. They're probably the one down here holding the rope while the other person climbs. And so sixes can fluctuate between both of those spaces. Again, that's a little bit where that inner committee comes in, but a lot of sixes tend to identify with one or the other more. Sixes are very communal minded, very community oriented. They have kind of this ability to think of the common good and what's best for everybody. They have really good intuition. Sixes need to learn how to trust themselves. They don't trust themselves, but when they do, it's like, again, that superpower of an ability to know what's right and what to do next. And they're also sixes tend to be really witty and really funny. So when you get to know a six, and when you're in with the six, you're in with them. So it might take a second for them to trust you and to put their guard down, but then they're in it for life. And then we have our sevens, last but not least, our sevens, the entertaining optimist. Sevens want to be seen as the joyful person. So they're always optimistic, they're enthusiastic, they always have a good thing to say. Sevens have a tendency, one of their kind of defense mechanisms too is reframing things. So you may come to them having a bad day and they may say, yeah, well, at least this didn't happen, or look at the bright side. And so sevens, and one of the reasons they do this, because their biggest desire is to be happy and content. And they're very scared of being trapped in emotional pain, of being bored. So they're always trying to stay away from that. And so sevens kind of access one half of emotions. They access our half of like happiness and joy, and they don't want to go into sadness or grief, because that means they'll be trapped in this emotional pain. So they're kind of doing everything they can to not have to experience that, which is where their weakness of gluttony comes in. So not just necessarily with food, but even with experiences, sevens are always trying to go after more, more, more. So what else can I get so that I'm not having to deal with any kind of pain or being bored? And so what else can I do? I don't want to miss out on this. There's, if a seven's looking at a big menu, they might decide on something, but then they are like, oh, but if I get that, I miss out on this over here. And so a friend of mine who's a seven, often when I would invite her to go do something, she'll be like, yeah, but then I'm going to this party after that. And then I have to be at this place after that. And so she in one night had like 4 different plans. And I was like, your plans just make me tired thinking of them. But that's a very seven-ish thing to do, jumping from one thing to another. And so, but sevens also they're very playful, they have high energy, they're really inventive and idea people, and so really good at thinking forward. And they, again, with 8s and 3s, move through life pretty quickly. They're sevens, I will say this about sevens, 2s and 9s especially, when they start doing their good work around personal growth work and really bringing self-awareness, 7s, 2s, and 9s can often experience the most pushback from people, because the people in their life really benefited from their unhealthiness and really benefit from them staying in those ego structures. So for a 7 to start saying no to things, or to stop going to everything, or to be accessing that sadness and grief, people might say like, you're always the life of the party, what's wrong with you? And for a 2 to start saying no and having boundaries and not be the first one to say yes to everything and be there at everyone's beck and call, people are like, you always are helpful, like you always show up, what are you doing, you're so selfish. Or a 9 who finally makes their opinion known and says like, no, I don't believe that, I don't want to do that. And then people are like, you're always go with the flow, what are you doing? So I like to just mention that too, if you are a 7, 9, or 2, that your work, it's good hard work and it's important. And also for those of us who love 7s, 9s, or 2s, to help celebrate when they are showing those kinds of decision-making things that really put them in touch with their truest self, instead of sometimes, with, not to hate on our 8s, we love our 8s, but for an 8 who sometimes tends to be more aggressive or angry and makes their opinion known about everything, for them to realize like, oh, maybe let me take a seat, like sit back and let other people talk, that's not necessarily going to get pushback from people. And so just recognizing this is one reason the Enneagram is so helpful to understand and know the types of people around us, because we can help encourage them also in the work that they're doing themselves. So that is the last thing. We have like a few minutes. So any questions, feel free to unmute or type it in the chat box. And that's my information. If you guys also have any other questions or want to get a hold of me, you're welcome to do that. But first we have a couple minutes if there's any questions.
Abby, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Catherine. I'm an 8 and I've studied the Enneagram a lot. And you're so right about everything you said about 8s. But, and it's taken me a long time to realize about the sit down, shut up, listen to other people thing. And it's proven to be very helpful to me. And, do you have resources that you could, like, I'm thinking like podcasts, or for young people, for 20 somethings who are just coming into understanding themselves anyway, to understand themselves in light of the Enneagram. They're not going to read a book. I mean, I would love for them to read the books, but they're not going to read the books that we could recommend, that you could recommend for sort of not just the sort of quick and dirty you're a 4, but like what from beyond that. Any suggestions?
Yeah. So one, Suzanne Stabile has the Enneagram Journey, which is a good one. She has a lot of episodes. So I would encourage people to, even one good thing about Suzanne is even when she's talking about like another type, other things, good wisdom comes out of it.
Yeah.
So I would encourage that one for sure.
Okay.
And then there's so many, there's so many that one thing I encourage people to do is, especially now, there's a lot of Enneagram podcasts. So I would encourage people, that's the one I would probably give the highest recommendation to for people. And then for others to do a search, of podcasts and take a listen to a couple to see what resonate, how they learn best from someone. Another good thing, which I say this with like a caution label, I feel like, but there's some good Enneagram accounts on Instagram. Some are not super great because they just kind of give the surface level, but the Enneagram workshop is a really good, that's one of my good friends who does that one. And she just goes deeper than just like, this is your type. So I would say the Enneagram workshop, and then let me see if I can find the other one that I'm thinking of. But that might be another, if they're not going to read.
That's good. Yeah. Okay.
And then 9 Types Co. is another one.
Okay.
That's a good one. But yeah, that's another thing kind of with the same with the podcast is, looking at some different Enneagram Instagram accounts to see what
good idea
resonate.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
Another one, this goes, Annie Downs does a good Enneagram summer series that goes deeper, so that's another one that if people want to kind of focus on a series than just like one podcast focus to the Enneagram. Every summer she has like an Enneagram summer series she does.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and make sure you come to the summit if you're not already signed up. It's going to be great, and I appreciate your time and being here with us.
Thank you, Abby. We appreciate yours.
Yeah.
And I put a link to the summit if you haven't signed up or you're interested. And I also put a link to a survey form. So if you have a sec to fill that out, that'd be great too. And thanks for being here. Good to see y'all.
Thank you.